You can't wear the hat.
What hat?
There's
Because
some
it's
parades.
referencing biology.
There's some parades you can't wear the hat. You can't wear the pussy hat.
You can't wear the pussy hat because
You don't have one.
You
because you don't
have a
one.
vagina.
But you're a woman, even though you don't have a vagina.
But trans women don't have a vagina.
So you can't wear the hat.
That's right.
Okay, is there a rocket leaving for Mars? Because the hell with this place.
As our regular listeners know, Wrongspeak is grateful for the support of Quillette.com, where I work as an editor and where Debra's published articles often appear. But this week we have a new supporter, which perhaps fittingly, given my own background as a Montrealer and a lawyer, is the world-class Montreal-based boutique law firm of Goldwater Dubé, which specializes in litigation in areas such as family law, human rights, employment law, even the emerging growth field of animal rights. From a political point of view, this is a firm that fights for everyone's rights, no matter where you sit on the ideological spectrum. Kind of like Wrongspeak, in fact. On one hand, Goldwater Dubé helped legalize same-sex marriage here in Canada. On the other hand, they also famously brought the libertarian case for religious rights all the way to the Canadian Supreme Court. The firm's senior partner, Anne-France Goldwater, is basically Quebec's own Judge Judy, and her son Daniel is continuing the family tradition, leading a team of young attorneys. If you feel like you might have a legal problem in Canada, anything from divorce to custody to defamation, book a consultation at follow.gd/Wrongspeak. By adding Wrongspeak to that URL, you'll get 25% off their usual hourly consultation rate. Once again, that's follow.gd/Wrongspeak. Or contact them through their website, goldwaterdube.com. That's goldwaterdube.com.
I'm Dr. Debra So, and this is Wrongspeak, the podcast about the things we believe to be true, but cannot say.
And I'm Jonathan Kay, Debra's co-host. And Debra, if Wrongspeak is the podcast for things we believe to be true, but cannot say, then how come the first 3 episodes of our podcast didn't make people as angry as we feared they might?
I know, I was really surprised too, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly why that is. I think because on some level, the majority of people who listen to us were relieved because they secretly agreed.
I think maybe in a way the most flattering comment I heard was somebody who was on the left side of the political spectrum said, grudgingly, it wasn't quite as bad as I expected it to be.
We weren't as bigoted as they were hoping.
Now, I like to think it's because we're great podcasters, but this episode we're going to do something special. We're going to look back at the 3 topics we covered before we launch onto new topics in the next couple of episodes that we'll be releasing shortly. And we have with us in our small studio Adrienne Batra, editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun newspaper, and Steve Kerzner, a veteran comedian here in Canada, perhaps best known as the voice of Ed the Sock, long-standing character who is in fact a sock. And he's also launching a new network called the FU Network. And both of them will be talking to us about some of the issues that we talked about in the first 3 podcasts, in particular, transgender issues, James Damore and the issue of gender differences and what can and cannot be ascribed to biological difference. And of course, we'll be talking about Lindsay Shepherd, the free speech hero, some might say, who even in the months since we originally met her has gone global with her crusade for more academic freedom. And so without further ado, let's get into the panel discussion with our 2 guests. So we weren't just looking for people whose views we respect and who are well informed. We were also looking for people who we felt would be candid about what they heard on our podcast and about their own views about the issues we discussed.
And I have to say, I'm super excited to have both of you here. I would love for you to just tell us what you really think. Don't hold back at all.
No,
You're going to be sorry.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to start off by, our first episode was an interview with James Damore, and we talked about the larger issue of the gender gap in tech and whether sexism plays a role or whether this is due to biological influences in terms of what men and women find interesting, and whether the coverage of Damore's saga was fair. So I guess I'll start with Ed, because you were pretty vocal. I mean, I think this is the first time we actually came into contact on social media, was because you didn't really like what I had to say about this, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say now that you're sitting across from me.
All right, well, first of all, can I just say, I'm not sure I understand the purpose of the podcast. You say that it's things that we believe to be true, but can't say out loud, something like that?
Well, okay. There are things that we feel we cannot say, but there's an element of truth to it. So we're trying to see why is it that we can't say these things out loud.
That makes sense to me, but things that we believe to be true, but can't say, you think we have a problem with that now? You think we don't have enough people out there saying what they believe to be true with absolutely no facts to back it up? I don't think we have a problem with people saying what they believe. What we have a problem is people taking that belief, researching it, and then having some actual basis to it. Now you got people who don't want to talk about any kind of research. They just want, this is what I believe. I don't give a crap what people believe. Does it have any backup, any basis? Now, you and I came into conflict a little bit on Twitter because I didn't agree with what you said, but you started with facts. Okay?
I try to.
Yeah, never mind you try to. This is the humble crap. You started with facts. I have no problem with someone who starts with facts and then interprets the facts. That is fair. But when people don't want to deal with facts because they know that the facts are just elitist, which means somebody read a frickin' book, I got a problem with that.
So what was your issue then in terms of what I had to say about it?
I don't know. What did you say about it? I don't remember. It was a while ago. You
were saying that it was due more to sexism and that women face issues that men don't have to face in the industry.
You're a woman. Is that not true? Have you never had to face issues? Well, you know what? You don't know because you've never been a man and a woman. So there's no way you can know if you face things that a man wouldn't face. But yeah, it's true. You talking about the tech world? The tech world, it's a circle jerk. You know, it's like, you know what, here, I'll give you an example.
Well, have you been in the tech world though? Or is this what people have told you secondhand?
I went to one of those stores to buy a video game. So I've been in the tech world. But you know what? Let's look at the comic book industry, okay? It was dying. The biggest cohort of increase in comic book sales, women. And you know why women are reading comics now? Because they can do it online with their e-readers. They don't have to go into the comic book store, which was a bunch of sweaty guys who are always talking about things that were exclusionary to women because these guys were all trying to sound like alpha males and they're like gamma males. It was an uncomfortable place for women to go. They had an interest in comic books, but they wouldn't go in because the store, the culture, was just not welcoming to women. It isn't that it was offensive to women. It was, who the hell wants to be a part of that? If you're not a guy who's a gamma male trying to be an alpha male, why the hell would you want to walk into that environment? And it's the same thing in tech. Why would you want to be part or go into a job where you know that primarily it's guys and it's not men, it's guys. And it's guys who are trying guy culture and bro culture. And even though these guys aren't bros, they're trying really hard to be bros, which is worse than actual bros. So why would you as a woman want to step into a place where you have to sort of perform as male when you can go into something that maybe you don't have to do that because work environment's really important. It isn't that women aren't interested in technology. It isn't that there's some biological thing. Women just want to raise babies. Women are interested in technology. It's just they're not interested in being in that environment with a bunch of loser guys.
But I would argue if a woman really is interested in something, she's going to pursue it. And even if the environment is a little bit trickier, she's still going to do it. I think the difference we see, and I've said this before, is because women just inherently don't find these fields as interesting. Not to say that there aren't any women at all, but I have a PhD in STEM, and you know, I would say that I have experienced sexism, but it wasn't so terrible. It's definitely not as bad as people make it sound. If that
for you,
well, but I think most women, I see a lot of my colleagues are female, and they managed to go through and get their degree.
How many didn't? How many didn't?
Well, I say the ones. I say the ones that did. Well, you're speaking anecdotally too about stores. Do you have any data to back up the idea that women?
Well, if I went onto my phone now, I could find that data because it exists. But you're talking about you and the women who decided to push through. You don't know how many women didn't push through, and it's not because they're weak. It's because they just decided that their love of STEM wasn't strong enough to deal with the rest of the crap. There's a lot of industries that are like that have nothing to do with men or women. People just don't like the culture. They like the job, they like the technology, or they like the vocation, but they don't like the culture involved. You can't say that, well, it wasn't so bad for me, so it can't be too bad for anybody else.
Well, but I would argue if you really want to do it, you'll do it.
Could I jump in for, because, well, since I'm a gamma male, I guess I'll just shirk away. Cause I've been in that comic store, in Montreal. It was called Captain Quebec. It was on the corner of Decarie and Queen Mary. And I've been in many other stores like it, including here in Toronto. And it's true what you say, that those stores, really were like that. And, hobbyist computer stores back in the 80s and 90s were like that too. There's certainly a lot of tech culture and geek culture that really does answer to the description, Ed, that you supplied. However, that has changed. I did my engineering degree in the 90s, and I've also been to Mountain View, California, and visited the Google campus, which is what we're talking about here, because we're talking about James Damore. And that place is like an absolute world apart from the gamma male cave that we're talking about in terms of, I don't know, sort of like Radio Shack 30 years ago, or Captain Quebec, or even McGill Engineering Department when I went there in the 90s. If you go to Mountain View, California, you go to the cafeteria, and I mean, it's sort of, there's vegan options, and everything's brightly lit, and there's all sorts of macrame clubs, and everything is there in order to attract great talent from every sector of society, men, women, overseas, a completely cosmopolitan environment that's designed to be welcoming, to every group conceivable. So while it's completely true, I'm someone in my 40s, I do recognize the environment that was completely hostile to women that you're describing. That environment, maybe, I'm sure it does still exist, especially, you go to online gaming culture and you play a first-person shooter video game. You can find plenty of gamma dudes who very much sound like they're still locked in that comic book store culture. But by and large, the major tech employers in places like California and here in Canada, they're a more enlightened species, I would argue.
All right, hang on a second. Are you saying that having vegan food and macrame makes it more welcoming to women? Women are inherently drawn to vegan food and macrame? What the hell kind of crap is that? That has nothing really to do with attracting women. It does have to do with being more inclusive as far as people's dietary needs, but that doesn't necessarily say that that people don't still have their little basketball hoops on their cubicles.
Wait, I'm being lectured on stereotypes from the guy who started off by talking about essentially the comic book store guy from The Simpsons, and proceeding from that stereotype.
The problem with that, John, is it's true, and you acknowledge that it's true. So get off my back. Okay. It's true.
Okay.
Let me dive in here.
Yes, please.
Because I think there's an element of all of it. It's all of the above. I think there is sexism. I think there is a biological difference, because that's the difference between men and women. It's still biology. I have a number of girlfriends who are entrepreneurs in the tech sector, and one of the things that they say is actually their biggest obstacle is for getting funding for their initiative, for their new idea. So in sort of Silicon Valley, it's predominantly male startups that still get a lot of money, but it's fundamentally changing. And if you talk to these women, what they'll say is those investments, they're starting to recognize that, well, hang on a second, they're the 52%. And if we want to make smart business decisions, obviously we need to start making investments in women that are doing, that are in the sector. We have so much focus and push for women in STEM and for young women. And I think those are all very, very positive. But you posed, Ed, earlier this notion of, well, how many women didn't go through it? How many women sort of stepped back and said, I'm not going to fulfill my dream of being a biologist because some a-hole was potentially sexist to me. I would tell you this, a vast majority of women handle that by just keep on going. They don't cower. They don't go shrink like little violets. I spent 7 years in the Army, and when I went through my basic training, there's a division within the Army, it's called EME, Electrical Mechanical Engineers. And in my time, that was in the early 90s, when I did my basic training, for that particular area of engineering, half the class were women. And half of them they're smart, they're going through education, doing all these things. And yeah, we would all talk about it. That's the guys have a certain mentality, but they didn't quit. In fact, if anything, it was the guys that were quitting. But anyway, I just think that there's this larger conversation we're having in the science and tech world where people sort of have this perceived sense. They watch that show, Silicon Valley.
I love that show.
It's all those dudes sitting around, and then the one or two female characters are in there to be their girlfriend or they're the administrator or whatever the case may be. But I mean, that I don't think is it's the furthest thing from the reality, which I think if you talk to women that are going through that, and those women that are running those big firms now, running some of the universities that are bringing all these new people in that Jonathan just talked about, different demographics. Things have changed, and if we would rather just sit here and whine and wring our hands about saying, "Oh, well, it's just not fair," then we're doing those women a disservice.
All right, but who's wringing their hands and saying it's not fair? We're talking about whether it's biology or their social constructions. I'm not saying that we need to wring our hands and say that women are shrinking violets and can't do it. What I'm saying is, this is a cultural construction. The reason women don't go into tech is there are cultural barriers. And a lot of it is being, sure, great, it's changing. I believe that. But for a long time, the idea, if you were a girl and you wanted to be interested in video games or Dungeons and Dragons or electronics, and you're in junior high school, you're not womaning properly. So women did not take those classes, and there's data on this. Women did not take the classes that would get them to a career in STEM because at that age, when women are feeling women and men are trying to define who the hell they are, they stick to these very rigid ideas of what is a man or a woman. And so they didn't stream themselves because their friends didn't go into those classes, and it became all men. It's changing now. But these are there is nothing about a woman that makes her less interested or capable in tech than there is a man. My comedy partner, Leanna Kerzner, does video game criticism online. And she got lots of hell for not being a proper woman because she is, if you talk to her, if you were just looking at her stuff online, you'd think she was a guy. Because of her interests and the passion of her interest in video games and tech, but she gets hell because she's not being a proper woman or proper feminist. So there are social constructions that mitigate against this.
I'm going to push back on the idea that this is simply a matter of social construction, though. Segueing from the idea of video games, one of my big hobbies is board gaming. And I can tell you that when I started doing it in the 90s, there were very few women. One of the reasons there were very few women in board games is all the board games were about military themes. And it was, my tank versus your tank, my army versus your army. One of the things that's changed that is that there's been an explosion in what's called Euro games. Settlers of Catan is one of them, Ticket to Ride. These are games that tend to have non-violent themes. And so you've seen this explosion in popularity in couples gaming, female gaming. When I go to board gaming conventions, I see tons of women. But it's still absolutely the case that if you go into the room where people are playing the hardcore World War II war games, there's no women. And they're invited to go there. The convention itself is full of women. You could say, well, okay, I guess they're being excluded. But I know this from playing with men, from playing with women. And I think maybe Debra can speak more about this. I do think there's a biologically rooted difference in some of the interests that exist between men and women. And this is one of the things that James Damore talked about, not in an artful way, but this brings us back to the subject is, James Damore, if you read his manifesto, as I know everyone here has, he talked, again, not artfully. He didn't just talk about the biology. He talked about the mix of social inducements and behaviorist conditioning. But the thing that got everyone mad, and which I think is entirely defensible, is there is a biological difference in male and female brains, which expresses itself in some cases in the things they're interested in.
Well, hang on a second. Are you saying that biologically women are less violent? Have you ever seen women fight? What kind of, have you seen the girl gangs that exist now in LA? Women are violent. They've just been,
so why is our prison,
to be people who bridge gaps and who are conciliators. Women can be just as, that's like I hate this crap that if women ran the world,
I'm going to push back.
Wars.
I'm going to push back.
Bunch of crap.
I'm going to push back on this. Can you point to any civilization in human history at any point where the female population accused of violent crimes or in prison has even approached the percentage of men in prison?
Okay, wait a second. Are you then saying that's biology as opposed to...
Yes.
Okay, tell me...
Yes, it is.
Why is it biology? Women just don't commit violent crimes?
Because evolutionary psychology has rewarded violent risk-taking behavior in men more than in women because of mate selection and
testosterone.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's all biology. Women are we're all victims of our biology.
Even if you have women, so say in the case of your partner who is a little bit more male typical, she probably was exposed to higher levels of testosterone when she was in the womb. And that's what led to differences in terms of what she finds interesting.
Well, that sounds like a lot of crap.
But it's not crap.
Wait, you started off. You started off by talking about how much you respected facts, and Deborah with her PhD. Like, I mean,
okay,
now, wait a sec. Now it's inconvenient and suddenly it's crap.
If you can tell me you're conjecturing that she was exposed to more testosterone in the womb.
But if you look at their studies that show this,
how's that conjecture? Well, thank you for your permission to
mansplaining.
No, you don't get to talk
mansplaining now,
Ed.
Ed.
You don't get to talk a lot.
I think it is grossly irresponsible to take the viewpoints and the value system from the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s and put them into 2018 perspective with respect to either conversations about women in tech, things that women choose to do or whatever, sort of social construct that we want to have a conversation about. Because that is where I think this discussion that Jonathan and Debra have started about Wrongspeak is so much stemmed around what this young guy said from Google. It wasn't his overarching thesis that this is just reality, these are different. You get into this world where you say something that is against the Twitterverse and they will sick a mob on you. And that's it. And who gets upset? Who is really, like, if you talk to other women, and if you talk to other men about what this young man said, they're like, yeah, well, he's not necessarily wrong. People just don't get as excitable about it, and they don't, become keyboard jockeys and get on there and try to tear someone's life down. That's the difference between then and now. We have everything is out there, everything is public, and I know even for myself, constantly, you sort of, I'm going to say this in the mainstream media interview that I'm going to do. I know exactly where people are going to pounce on me, and just try to, excoriate me on social media. But I'm not afraid to say it. I just think if you aren't prepared to realistically acknowledge that there is this biological difference, especially in this world of we're talking about transgender, we're talking about questioning, all of these things. Until science tells me otherwise, I'm good with the differences between male and female, Ed.
Well, okay. Yes, there are differences. Yes, there are differences. I can't have a child. There are absolutely differences. I don't have a lot of estrogen. There are differences. That doesn't mean that affects necessarily interests. And you're right.
But it does.
Trying to judge people today based on the social mores of what they did in the 70s or the 80s, you're putting somebody on trial for what was considered okay across a societal thing back then. That's a load of crap. When people do that and say, well, look what you said back in 1973. Well, you know what? It was a whole different social time then.
Style at the time.
Well, you know what? Certain things are different. That poor guy Nolan Bushnell who started Atari, was instrumental in bringing women in to work at Atari. And he brought people into tech. But because the company had hot tub parties back then, he's considered, he lost an award, a Lifetime Achievement Award, because he had hot tub parties in the 70s. When everybody had hot tub parties in the 70s, nowadays they consider that as a corporate retreat, kind of, not correct. But we learn as we go along. I mean, who wants to be judged by what we understood and thought was good when we were 10 years old? I mean, you can't do that. I agree with you. And the Twitterverse is like a hydra. Cut off one asshole and two more take its place. Yeah. Okay, you can't really judge. It's mob. And John, if it's all biology, you mentioned that
I didn't say it was all biology.
There's more and more women, you said, coming into engineering and all these other classes. Well, if it's biology, what has changed biologically?
A lot of what's changed is the way these things are taught, and also the end product.
The way they're taught isn't biology.
Also, the end product. Like comic books is another example. When I was a kid, comic books were about men in tights punching each other. And if you look at the way graphic novels evolved in the 80s and 90s, even by the way, graphic novels that were oriented to men, I'm thinking of the Dark Knight, Watchmen in particular. Watchmen, which was mostly about male characters, but actually which had some strong female characters. It was also just about the inner lives of characters, and it started being more interesting, and not just more interesting to women, more interesting to different kinds of men. And you just started seeing the cultural product. You saw it in video games, you saw it in board games, you saw it in movies, you saw it in comics. And obviously, if the cultural product that comes out into the consumer market is more interesting to people are going to get more turned on to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to learn to draw. I'm going to learn to program. I'm going to learn to become an engineer. And they're going to apply their skills because they're turned on by the subject matter. It doesn't mean there isn't some underlying difference in biology. And this goes, Ed, you were talking about, what does Wrongspeak mean? Going back to what Adrienne said, Wrongspeak is the gulf that exists between what we're allowed to say on Twitter and what we say in our private conversations. Because what James Damore said about the difference between men and women is not so different from what I hear people at the CBC or other networks or other newspapers saying in private conversation. It's just they'd be scandalized to see it or read it on Twitter because you can't say it publicly, even if you could admit it to your friends and your relatives after a couple glasses of wine.
I think James Damore got screwed. I think he was misrepresented. His comments were completely misrepresented. He's on the spectrum, so his method of expressing himself is different, and so that was held against him. I think Damore got screwed, and all these biases against women or these underrepresentations, I think that's accidental. I don't think there's anybody sitting there pulling a string saying, let's make this so women aren't interested. I don't think that's the case. And that's the problem, is a lot of people who are on the left say that it's patriarchy, it's deliberate, they want to drive women out. That's a load of crap too. First of all, anybody who's ever been in a large organization knows there's no organization. There is no way human beings have ever been able to conspire that effectively. So the idea that this is planned is crap. I also think the idea that it's heavily biologically driven is crap. I think that it's happened. It's how society has evolved. We're continuing to evolve. We will see more women involved in STEM and so on. And that's why I don't think biology is going to get in the way. We're growing as people. We're not sticking to these rigid gender stereotypes anymore.
The biggest obstacle to women, and I know I'm pivoting from the main argument here, but I think it's worthwhile to interject with this, is the biggest obstacle for women are other women. They are the ones that they are the.
Let's name them.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Let me get my list. It's a growing one. Let me tell you. No, I think that is actually an important part of this conversation. I often get asked to speak to young women in journalism. I was speaking at a Ryerson International Women's Day class, and I sort of sat around. I'm like, what the hell in wisdom am I going to impart on these young women they're going to walk away from this? It's going to be a value add. Well, it's International Women's Day, so let's talk about the realities of International Women's Day, and that's fine. Let's all celebrate it. Yay. Let's all hug. But what are you doing for each other? So my point to them was, there's a certain generation of women that have been brought up a certain way and in a certain time. They believe that there's only enough room around the table for them, and they have that seat, and they are not going to share it. They're not going to retire. They are there.
And they're the ones that are not letting women come in.
Exactly. So the difference between a woman like me, I think, and a woman like that, I never asked for my seat at the table. I just kind of took it. And so that was sort of my notion to them. You're going through engineering. You're going through journalism. You're going through these processes. You're going to become an editor. You're going to do all these things. You're going to be in charge one day. Don't ask for the permission. Just do it. And along the way, by the way, there's going to be 20 or 30 women that are going to ask you for help. They're going to ask you for an internship. They're going to ask you for a mentor. Be that person to do that. A lot of women don't do that for each other. So when I hear the P word, the patriarchy, it makes my brain angry, because I believe in my career, it's been men that have helped me. It's been white men that have helped me.
I would agree with that too.
And they are the ones that are far more apt to say, I'm going to mentor you. I know things have changed in the #MeToo era, but certainly at the time when I was growing in my professional career, it was them that said, I'm going to help you. You've got some talent or you're a hard worker or whatever. They're the ones that help me, not women. In fact, women are the ones that wanted to tear me down because they, as I said, didn't feel that there was enough room around the table. So that is also part of this conversation.
I wish that could be on a t-shirt, because you're 100% right. And I mean, it's like you see in the U.S. now, all these people who identify as Americans saying we don't want immigrants here because there's only enough for us. We don't have enough for anybody else. Women do that too. I have never been in an experience I've worked in places where the women were at the top. I've never been in a place where men gave a damn about the woman in the workplace, the woman being a boss, ever. It was all about, do I respect what they do? Do I respect the work they do? But women listen, when women dress, they talk about how men decide how women are going to dress when they go out. You know, this idea that women have to dress exotic and sultry. No. You go to a bar, you will see men are looking for reasons to include a woman. Say, if they don't like her bosoms, they say, look at her bum. They don't like her bum. They say, oh, look at those ankles. Guys are always looking for a reason to be attracted. Women are the ones who say, look what she's wearing. How could she wear that? Look what a tramp she looks like. You don't hear that from guys. Women are savage to other women.
Women dress for women.
Okay, so can if I can just bring this back from
you're still here?
This barroom context. I think I'm the oldest person here in the room, 49 years old. And one thing I do remember is I had a friend who worked at Wachtell Lipton law firm in New York. This is back in the 90s. It was known as like the most hard-ass law firm. This is back when I was a tax lawyer. Everyone billed 3,000 hours a year or whatever. And it is absolutely true that the most notorious person in that my friend's department was a woman. That said, the reason this woman was such a hard ass was because she had to prove herself in such an unfair, arduous way. And there was a selection process. I mean, she probably came up in the 70s and 80s, and she had to be a bigger bitch than everybody around her, men or women. And it was a bitchocracy. She won. And it wasn't representative of women. It was representative of the women who made it in those days. And I can see why that person, having scratched and fought her way to the top, would not be the kindest and gentlest interlocutor when you came to her office and say, oh, can I have a pat on the head and let's go out for chamomile tea and you can mentor me and do macrame and eat vegan food to extend the stare. So
You like macrame and I know it. I know if I went up to your place, I would find like pot holders and things like that.
By the way, I own this.
That's our parting gift.
All the macrame. Yeah. Oh, great. I
tweeted about scented candles yesterday. So I own this. I own this. All I'm saying is, yes, it's absolutely true that there are mean women out there. Some of them, I think, ironically, at least in my day, mean because of the I'm going to use that word, the patriarchal forces that were imposed on them. But I think one thing that we've gotten maybe sickened over on Twitter is the idea that it's gotten too far, and so it's become so tribalized that you can't sometimes say the obvious human fact that bad people come in all shapes and sizes and genders. And sometimes there's bad men and sometimes there's bad women. And there is sometimes this discourse that says, men bad, women good, men are liars, believe the woman. And yet at the same time, if you then turn around and say, oh, but there's biological differences, that's somehow verboten. So I think maybe it sounds like we're all frustrated with that.
I hate the term patriarchy mostly because the people who use it the most are people I can't stand. They're people on the left who make me want to march in Charlottesville. Okay. It's like, if you are liberal, I want nothing to do with you, because all the people who use patriarchy are people I want to punch in the face. And that's why I don't like the term. But to Adrienne's point, the people that opened the doors were men. That doesn't mean there wasn't a patriarchy. It means there was, because it's the people who are gatekeepers that can open the gates. That's why you get, Black Lives Matter Toronto says, we don't need no white people helping us. Well, guess what? That's who's going to open the doors, because if they close the doors, you can stand outside screaming all you want. They're inside where it's warm and dry, and they've got the key to the door. Patriarchy is something that happened, okay? It existed. To continue to believe that it is something that current men really believe in is a load of crap. Most men are pretty egalitarian, and they judge you based on, can you do the job? That's it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that's part of where the challenge is you get this small faction. We always say in our industry, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You get this small faction, often very loud feminists, who say, you're shutting me out. You're keeping those doors closed, to your point, Ed. They are the ones that aren't affording me an opportunity to do this. Damn you, patriarchy. And this notion is sort of penetrated into the mindsets of people. And I mean, very educated, professional people that I've spoken to, they have gone through the law firms, they've gone through the medical schools, they've gone through all these systems where it was predominantly male. That one or two women that were there at the time, yes, they were hard asses, yes, they were tough, but they never quit. They kept doing it. They kept doing all these things. I just think that it's only troubling when your best answer and the only out you have is to say, well, someone else is keeping me down. And I think it's lazy. It's too much of an excuse. And I think far too often we give that part of the conversation far more credence than we should, where most of us vast majority are working, getting their degrees or whatever post-secondary they want to try to be a productive member of society. That's really what people are focused on. Not sitting in some office, in an ivory tower and a bunch of white guys smoking cigars and patting each other on the back saying, ha ha, we kept the women out. Good job. No. They're just decent guys who understand a business model and understand that having a diverse workforce, having people around your table, but it's also, I know I don't want to dominate this too much, but
don't worry, I've been doing that.
Being a woman who's a minority, who's served in the army, who is a conservative, who is from the prairies and was born in a small town. I'm like the antithesis of everything that everybody thinks I should be, right? I should be a liberal.
Should be a female person of color.
That's right. I'm a bad POC, a bad person of color. And I'm a Sikh. Oh my gosh, all these things, they all add up. But I fashion myself to be someone who is pretty open-minded, very honest, and with a varying degree of experiences, to not put myself in this one bubble, in this one box. But I find myself being the one that's asked to do a lot of commentary on more, conservative-minded issues and principles and values, because I'm not hysterical. I'm not like out there lighting my hair on fire. It's like I fashion myself to be reasonable. Most of us are, and that's how we operate ourselves. But and we govern ourselves. I just think that far too often we get pigeonholed and boxed into this corner. God forbid, I'm the editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun. Yikes. That's always, so often gets people's back up. But, I don't have horns in the tail.
I didn't know you're from the prairies or that you were Sikh, or I'm discovering all sorts of things about you.
Yeah. That's all true.
Yeah.
Just ask my mom.
Wrongspeak brings people together.
Okay. So before we segue into the next topic, I just wanted to make a point about the women who are attacking other women. It's interesting because that also has evolutionary, roots. So if you look at something called intrasexual competition, this idea that women have to fight with each other for partners. So even though feminism claims that women are so far above this and it's a sisterhood or whatever, at the core, women are still fighting with each other, and there's still that very, very strong biological force. So I think it's interesting that the enemy has been targeted as white men, because it makes it seem as though, okay, if we fight white men, that's going to get us somewhere. And I think some women are aware that by doing this, they're actually deflecting the actual cause of the problem. And so it keeps these other women from actually getting what they want.
I agree.
Well, I kind of agree, but we've talked about this we're beating the dead horse. Move on. What's next?
Well, that's because you're losing the argument. That's why you're saying.
What do you mean losing the argument? I've been winning this argument the whole time. I could go to sleep and still be winning.
I'm sure. Tangents.
Yeah, except your random tangents were actually made sense. And your point about most people are rational before the social media. People who were rational and reasonable were the ones.
Before the social media?
What's that?
Before the social media.
Before the social media. That's right. I'm 1,000 years old. Before the Twitter and the social media. Thank you for pointing that out, Doctor. People who were reasonable were the ones who got media platforms. Now, the people who get media platforms are the people who are not reasonable.
Everybody can have one.
Well, and who do they show attention to?
People who are shrieking the loudest.
Yeah, 24-hour news is the worst thing that ever happened to humanity, because they got 24 hours to fill and not 24 hours of news. And so they stretch everything out and they look at it. It's like they could take a Bazooka Joe comic and try to find Nietzsche in it. Like they're spending too much time filling air, and it winds up being garbage. And that's the problem, is that how do you fill that air and draw people in? By having people who are screaming, who have their hair on fire, as you put it. It used to be that those were the people that were excluded. Now they're the people that everybody wants. And reasonable people you're like exiled to Siberia because you're not, like I mentioned, Liana, who is a reasonable feminist, and when there was a war about women in video games, said, yeah, you know what, there are some problems. They're not intentional. It was never intentional. There's some problems. They can be worked on. And because she both acknowledged there were some problems, there was the people who said there's no problems who hated her. And because she said it's unintentional, and it can be worked on, the feminists hated her. All her feminist friends just stopped talking to her because she was trying to be reasonable in the middle and say, yeah, I see there's a problem, but it can be fixed. Reasonable people these days are seen as traitors.
So if just for our listeners under 35, Bazooka Joe was a crudely drawn 4 to 6 frame comic.
Shut up. Everybody knows Bazooka Joe. They still have them.
Which came free with miniature bubble gums that you'd buy.
People still have Bazooka Joe. I bought some the other day.
Double Bubble still has the little comics.
Funny's Pud.
Yes.
And the guy with Pesty, with the guy with that turtleneck, yes. Right up to, like, why did he have that? No matter what the season, he wore this turtleneck. I think he had some kind of horrible disfigurement below the nose. I don't know.
I find him very problematic, which is why I don't read those comics.
Does it trigger you?
We're in a Captain Quebec.
Okay, so we're going to get to episode 2 in a minute. So that episode was about Lindsay Shepherd and this idea that academic censorship is becoming more of a problem. But since we're talking about gender, let's move on to rapid onset gender dysphoria.
Once again, this episode of Wrongspeak is brought to you by the world-class Montreal-based boutique law firm of Goldwater Dubé, a firm that can help you protect your rights, whether it's garden variety civil litigation, especially anything related to Quebec, where the firm is based, or collecting what's yours from an ex-spouse on the other side of the planet. Look them up at follow.gd/wrongspeak, or contact them through their website, goldwaterdube.com. That's goldwaterdube.com.
So this idea that young and they're usually adolescent girls who have no history of gender dysphoria are suddenly coming out as trans and they're being affirmed and going down the path of transitioning. So is this an increasing problem, do you think? Do you feel that we can talk about this issue openly?
And also for our listeners who maybe didn't hear the original episode or don't have a PhD like Debra, when we talk about gender dysphoria, we're
It's people who feel that they, are more like the opposite sex than the sex they were born as.
So born in the wrong body.
In a syllable,
that's the
trans.
narrative. Yeah.
Okay.
So to answer your question, no, I don't think that we can have an honest conversation about it. I don't think that there is enough facts out there that are being presented. I think in many ways, my son's 9, and I I've asked him about this in passing. Have you heard about this? And he's like, looks at me with his eyes and he's like, what the hell are you talking about, woman? It's not entered his sort of little sphere of...
And now you've put it in his mind, Adrienne. Yeah. Tick-tock, tick-tock.
I think Aiden's going to be just fine, but I just am so fascinated and shocked, frankly. These are not issues that we grew up with. These are not things that were at the forefront, the genderless washrooms or the, you get to decide where you're going to... how you're going to, if you're going to go to the male-female one or whatever it's going to be. These just weren't issues.
But I'm going to be the liberal here and say, you know what? When I was growing up, we didn't talk that much about being gay or lesbian, but that didn't mean it didn't exist.
No, I understand that. And I'm not saying that these are very challenging things for families and to contend with. I guess what I'm saying is that we are now, it's almost a glorification of it, to raise your child as a, what do they call it?
Like a nebulous blob without gender.
Thank you.
What? A nebulous blob?
I don't think that's back to our biology. I still believe, we're male and we're female, and you can identify in certain things. I just think let them have their opportunity to express themselves, but don't glorify it and say that this is all how life should be.
But this is so...
Because that makes it harder for them.
But I think the argument that people have about transgender issues sometimes is an argument about class, because it is absolutely true that there are portions of Western society where they do, I would not say glamorize, but celebrate the idea of people discovering their true identity, including sometimes a transgender identity. And I know that, my kids are fortunate enough to go to a really great public school, and there was a kid who came out as trans, and I mean, the school was incredibly supportive, like so supportive that you suspected they'd been waiting for years for a kid to declare himself or herself trans because they could just demonstrate exactly how enlightened they are.
I think that a lot of that celebration and that support is people calling attention to how wonderful they are and how tolerant they are, and less about whether they give a rat's ass about the person who says that. Now, I believe that trans happens. I know a man, a female transsexual who absolutely was a man all along. Yeah. I believe it happens, but I think that now what we're seeing is people celebrating. It's the same as they call it virtue signaling. We see people celebrating and carrying on their shoulders people who have embraced their trans nature because they want, look at me, I'm supporting this person. Look what a wonderful human being.
But I agree with you, Ed, but we're having this conversation in Toronto and we can all roll our eyes at the virtue signaling, and I do a little bit. On the other hand, 30 years ago, that kid would have got the crap beat out of him. Because
10 years ago.
Yeah. So I like the virtue signaling more than I like the kid getting the crap beaten out of him. Well, that said, and by the way, and there are still many parts of Canada where that kid would get still to this day. And that's why going back to what I said, it's an argument about class, because people who grow up in wealthy areas, and their kids go to school with the sons and daughters of college professors and professionals, and they have the luxury of rolling their eyes and say, oh, my school has really gone overboard on all this sort of like trans stuff, and it's too much, and like they were adding 17 colors to the rainbow flag. And however, people, you go on Twitter, it's not too hard to find. They will be more than happy to tell you about the opposite stories there are. And I don't want to say, oh, this is about small town versus big city or rural versus city. You will find horrible anti-trans bigotry. And one of the reasons I think the debate is so irreconcilable on social media is because you have people telling stories about the horrible bigotry and other people telling stories about the horrible virtue signaling, which has gone overboard, and you can't reconcile the two because they're essentially living in two different universes.
Yeah, and Twitter is just a terrible echo chamber anyway, right? That's not where these debates should be happening. It's just unfortunate that that's where a lot of it comes to prominence, and someone gets attention because they saw some interesting story on the news, it gets shared, and all those things. But pendulums often swing too far the other way too, because then you will potentially, and maybe this. So I only say this anecdotally from friends that I've talked about, kids who are a little bit older. They'll say, is there something wrong with me because I'm not talking about my gender identity? And 13, 14-year-old girls who, some in private school, they have these conversations about their openness and things like that. And one of the young ladies was like, is there something wrong with me because I'm not feeling that way? And so I think
that's the thing. It's gone too far now.
Yeah, I think we've just gone. We've not found a nice, happy medium where we can ensure that child who is going through what is. I can't imagine what that must be like. It's hard. Yes, it can be celebrated and appreciated, but let's face it, that child is going to have a hell of a road ahead of them. Be it through the social constructs, or be it through having to have a surgery or whatever. Their looks, their identity, everything. So on the other side of it is, well, there's nothing wrong with you if you don't feel that way.
But one thing to be welcoming, another thing to be encouraging.
But can I ask a question? Before you two, and I'm talking here, Ed and Adrienne, before you listened to the show, had you heard of the subclass of dysphoria, of the transgender phenomenon? That this rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is typically, for those who haven't heard the original episode to which we're referring, it's typically girls in their 14, 15, 16 years old who very suddenly, without having exhibited any of what might be called the classic stereotypical symptoms of a transgender identity earlier in life, they fall into a social sphere which may have a socially dominant trans-identified role model, and they go on Tumblr blogs, and within the space of maybe even a few weeks or perhaps a few months, they declare themselves to be transgender, and sometimes without the cooperation of their parents, school board officials and health officials will very aggressively help them transition to an opposite sex identity. I had not heard of this before I started researching this for the episode that we did. Deborah, obviously you've heard of this.
It's a big book. I mean, within the field of sexology, everyone knows it exists, but no one will talk about it publicly because they don't want to be excoriated.
I just want to ask you,
had you heard of this?
Say that they know that it exists. Do you mean that they know that it in fact actually happens, or that this is something we're seeing reported more now?
Both. So you see, there was one study that showed that the number of gender clinic referrals for girls has exploded in the last 10 years. Before, it was predominantly for boys, and then for some reason, there's been an inverse, so there have been more girls more recently. And even clinicians will say, if you're a good clinician and you talk to your patient, the patient will tell you what else is going on in their life. It's not ever about gender, but they have to say, okay, yes, you are trans. Yes, we will affirm you. They can't say anything else.
But Adrienne, had you heard about this?
Never.
You hadn't heard about this?
I had not.
So you're a parent and you're in the media and you hadn't heard of this rapid onset gender dysphoria?
No, and I hadn't heard the term, but when the two of you sort of deconstructed it, so to speak, it started making more sense to me in that girls tend to, they have a pack mentality, and then there's always the alpha female.
It's fitting in, yeah.
And it's all about fitting in. And it just so happens that this is the discussion they're having right now, is their gender identity. And JK, you say, if you have that sort of one dominant one in the group,
or charismatic,
charismatic, or even a bully, frankly, that is the alpha female, then you sort of think to yourself, okay, well, I have to go along with this. But really, maybe it's just, I want to play on the basketball team and I didn't make the team. Or maybe
who the hell knows? You remember being a teenager?
Young girls have this challenge, this perpetual wanting to fit in. That's why I thought the movie Mean Girls was a very, very good illustration of the realities that young women at that age face. Right now, it's this conversation about their gender identity. And so I appreciated that you guys did this, because it's not something that a vast majority of parents are aware of. And, we should have a sidebar conversation about the role of the school board, the role of the state in dealing with this too, but I won't go down that route.
I think also because the media keeps portraying the idea that if your child feels this way, you have to affirm. And if you don't, you're a bigoted parent.
That's right.
So that's why parents, even when I talk to people outside of work, they get very uncomfortable at this idea that I'm saying, but maybe some people who say they're trans aren't actually trans. And I get that, because there is a history of transgender people not being believed in the way that they feel, or being told that they shouldn't feel the way they do. But in this case, it doesn't help these girls. And the only study that's been done on this issue has shown that with girls who say, if there is someone in a friend group who comes out as trans, something like 50% of the friend group will later come out. So it really is like a social contagion. It is about girls trying to bond with each other and find some common ground.
Is it possible that they were originally together as a group in the first place because they all had some undercurrent that they felt comfortable with each other because they all were somehow trans? How the hell do I know? You know what? None of us here have had rapid onset gender dysphoria. We don't have kids that have gender. So here we are talking about something theoretically that. Are any of us really experts? Are any of us really qualified besides Debra to even talk about this?
I will defer to the highly trained professional at the table, which is Debra.
But I think you can tell from conversations you have with other parents. You guys all have kids, but even within, say...
I don't have kids.
You don't have kids.
But the entire
baby
nation
socks?
of Canada are
you don't
my
have
children.
I'm sure... What?
Yes, the entire... I am the father of the nation.
I was going to say, do you have little baby socks at home?
We're not getting into my ethnicity.
Can I, by the way, can I say it's absolutely true that aside from Debra, we don't have, professional experience with this. However, we all have something in common, which we all have gone to high school. We all have been teenagers. And I have, to this day, a vivid memory of being, at different points in high school, feeling like an outsider, and also watching people in my peer group go in for really healthy and unhealthy forms of social contagion. Suddenly people were goths, or they were doing drugs, or they were cutting, or they decided they were into heavy metal, or
all of those things.
Or they got into religion in a healthy way, or they got into religion in a really unhealthy way. This is a period in life where, hormones can change your personality over the course of a week or a month. And it also could be a point where you legitimately discover who you are. You could legitimately discover, you know what? I've been in denial. I'm gay. Or I'm trans. Or you do make discovery, but you could also make horrifying mistakes. And I think the reason we did that episode was because it's become taboo. It's become Wrongspeak, so to speak. In some cases, you can actually get human rights charges against you to actually seriously entertain the possibility of look, I know this kid, they're 15, they earnestly think that they are trans. Maybe there's something else going on in their life. Maybe they don't need to go on a cocktail of drugs that's going to maybe affect fertility issues long term. And to me, that sounds like common sense as a parent. It's become a form of, some people call it hate speech because you're not affirming the instinctive.
That's not hate. That's not hate.
It's not, but in this,
people call it that.
Yeah, well, people call lots of things. People are assholes. But here's the thing. Can you imagine making a decision at 14 that you would live with that would shape the rest of your life? Can you imagine if you were a goth at 14 and now you're 45 and you still have to be a goth?
Yeah.
Or even tattoos. People get tattoos when they're underage and like they definitely regret that.
I don't remember people I know who have tattoo removal, or like I would never get a tattoo because I recognize that there's no point in my life when I've always said I'll never do X, and then I find myself doing it. You know, that's the point of growing up. Unless you have your kids' names, which I understand because your kids' names they may change, but not to you. I don't understand making decisions that permanently affect you. Teenagers don't have that perspective in life because they haven't lived long enough to know that, hey, this is how I feel now. In 5 years, I probably will feel completely different. They don't get that. So you have to, there's a balance between saying, allowing somebody to explore who they think they are, because the more you inhibit it, the more they're going to insist that's who they are.
And I think that's part of the challenge, Ed, is that parents aren't being afforded that opportunity to sort of intervene in how a parent normally would if their child, boy, girl, was cutting themselves, had an eating disorder, was, felt depressed, for example. They aren't being given that chance to have that broader conversation, I think, because if you just say the words, then that it triggers all of these other sort of things that the school board will do and the state will do. And then to your point, Deborah, if you don't acknowledge it or accept it on the immediate, you are a bad parent, you are a bigot, you are transphobic, you are all of these things.
And they're told your child's going to kill themselves.
Not going through that. It could be a whole plethora of other things. So that's part of this discussion, I think, that bothers me the most, is you aren't allowed to say it's anything other than that. That's where I think the
reasonable questioning. You can't do that. Hey, listen, we're in a state, I think Deborah mentioned before, the pendulum, which swings back and forth. Because people were so dismissive of this for so long, now the pendulum is, well, if you're dismissive at all, it's a problem. You hope that it's going to eventually find some nice middle ground. But this is what happens when something is so socially weighted one way. When it starts to go the other way, it goes overboard as well. Like the whole thing about, believe the woman. I think you have to take every claim seriously, but the notion that women are somehow more truthful than men is sexist. But again, women have been for so long discouraged and told they were liars and so on about that. Now we're seeing that, okay, now we have to be a little more sensitive, because before we were completely insensitive.
Can I just, if I could just jump in for a sec, just going back to the episode that Deborah and I did about the rapid onset gender dysphoria issue. We had interviewed different people in that episode. We interviewed transgender. He's a man.
Todd Whitworth. What
I found really interesting was that he had this view which you don't hear, which is, he's just kind of like this regular guy who has moderate views, and you understand that even within the transgender community, as in every community, it's often the extremists who get the most attention.
Yeah, it's very heterogeneous.
There's like sort of 90% of people who are just living their lives are like, hey, like just live and let live. There's another person we interviewed, and I wanted to get Ed and Adrienne your impression of what that interview was like. I think his name was Jay Keck.
Yeah.
And he lived in the United States. We were a little vague about identifying because we didn't want to go and get in too much identifying detail about his child. And we could have interviewed 1,000 people like Jay Keck because he's a parent of a child who, to his mind, exhibits this rapid onset gender dysphoria. Someone, as he describes it, grew up healthy, happy girl, and in the space of a very short period of time, rapid onset gender dysphoria, decided she was a boy, the whole 9 yards, Tumblr, the alpha girl turned boy in her class, alienation from the school, the government got involved. I'm wondering, Adrienne, let me start with you because you're a parent. I got to admit, I was horrified because I was horrified not that she identified as trans. It's not, trans people are people. I was horrified by the fact that all the power got taken away from the parent. Yeah. And suddenly, how did you respond to that story?
So I'm glad we brought this one up because although this man loves his child, you can tell, I mean, all of the things that they went through, it was almost like he was heartbroken in a way because they were, as a family, not able to go through whatever she was going through to become a he. And because the state intervened, because of this loud activism that is going on, they are taking away the primary caregiver's opportunity to try to handle it and deal with it on their own. Of course, there has to be mechanisms put into place in order for parents to have supports and all of that. But that's through all sorts. That doesn't have to be state run. It can be through communities. The state has really overstepped on a lot of this, and you could hear that in his voice when he was talking about it. But as a parent, you feel for them because you never want any harm to come to your child, even being bullied, even being different. You know, growing up in out west, trust me, there were not a lot of Sikh kids running around. You know, not a lot of brown kids. So you know, we got made fun of or whatever. But it breaks your parents' heart. This is beyond just being teased or bullied. This is a biological change that their daughter was about to do. Not only is it hard on the child, but it's also hard on the parent.
And biologically meaning like drugs and
all of that. Yeah. But like I identified in just not wanting to see your child go through pain, but as a parent, having that power and that ability to try to deal with it in how you feel is necessary, taken away is just galling. I mean, we report on stories every day in the news about, you know, Bigfoot, a government intervening in your property, in your farm, or your, you know, on your private residence, you know, whatever, things like that. Not something like this, and it's quite terrifying. So, you could hear hurt in this man's voice.
And a spoiler for those who haven't heard the episode yet. He found out the other name by which his daughter was going, the male name, because the school was now calling the child by the male name and without notifying him first. So the school had gone ahead and affirmed her identity. But let me actually, Adrienne, if I can ask you a follow-up question, because you're editor-in-chief of a newspaper. The analogy people would draw, and this is in defense of people who take a very strong line on how we have to affirm kids when they say they're trans. We know that homosexuality is a real thing, even though a lot of people denied it decades ago. If you had a parent, let's say someone wrote an op-ed, wanted to write an op-ed for your newspaper, and said, "I'm a parent. My son says he's gay, but I don't believe in homosexuality because I'm a religious, take your pick, Jew, Christian, Muslim, whatever. And so what I've done is I've sent the kid to camp where they're going to teach him that he's really heterosexual and about Jesus Christ, and no one in my family will acknowledge his gayness because it's a disease."
Conversion therapy, I think.
Conversion therapy.
Yeah.
Would we agree? We would agree that that's bad parenting, right? And at a certain point, the state might get involved in that. Like, where do we, do you agree with that? Would you accept an op-ed in your newspaper that argued that on the gay issue?
So, I might, but I would also have someone counter it, so I would run them simultaneously. Because there are a lot of people that just genuinely feel that way. A lot of cultures, a lot of religions feel this way.
But that's wrong. Okay, so I'm going to be the liberal here. I believe that's wrong. Like, I believe homosexuality actually exists.
Well, it's also biological and can't be changed, so that's why conversion therapy is seen as ineffective.
But trans advocates would say it's exactly the same thing.
But factually, it's not the same thing.
But what I'm deferring to with respect to that, Jonathan, is people like Debra and others who are looking at this and studying this and researching it, because they've forgotten more on it than I will ever know. They're saying it's not.
So Debra, why is it not the same thing?
Because gender identity is not the same as sexual orientation. So if you have a little boy who says he's a girl, he's likely going to grow up to be a gay man. He's not going to still feel that.
Statistically, longitudinal studies have shown that.
Yeah, longitudinal studies have shown this. And so especially for prepubescent kids, their gender identity is flexible. So from a practical standpoint, even though it's not politically correct to say this, if you have a child that says they feel they are the opposite sex, if they can grow to be comfortable in the body they were given, why shouldn't that be an okay outcome?
So a gay man or a lesbian.
Yeah, I mean, they could end up being straight as well. But that's what the ironic thing is with this movement, because what's happening is you're taking gay children, and by allowing them to transition, they're actually going to look as though they're straight. So if you have a little boy who's very feminine, some parents, that makes them very uncomfortable. And they say, okay, well, instead of having a feminine boy who might grow up to be gay, I'd rather have a trans daughter.
So affirming transgender.
Wait, what?
It can be.
And so what happens then is
it's a form of homophobia.
Yeah, it is. So that little now girl, so male to female child, will grow up attracted to men and will appear to be a straight woman. So this is something people are not talking about.
Game.
But, well, okay, so there is something kind of darkly humorous about this, but it's also tragic in the way that gay men and women fought for generations for their rights. And you see this, how sometimes the most active critics of transgender militancy, as they would see it, are radical feminists, because they see at the extremes the transgender movement as a denial of
TERF, trans-exclusive radical feminists.
And that's a term of abuse. That's a term of abuse hurled at feminists by transgender activists.
I think that's all part of what's happening with so-called progressives, right? In general, they're so mad about so many things that they're just ostensibly eating each other's space. They can't just, it's the irony of why feminists are not against certain aspects of Islam. I mean, and yet they are the biggest proponents of women dressing themselves in burqas. So there's a philosophical inconsistency.
Although conservatives can be hypocritical too.
But I mean, I just think that there is, because we're in this zeitgeist right now of Me Too and, the $1 million pussy march or $1 million person pussy march and all of these things
and all those hats
and the hats.
I thought at first that you were describing a Fox show.
The hats,
which apparently we can't wear because in some parades, transgender women have decided, hey, I can't wear the hat because I don't have a vagina.
Vaginas are hate speech.
So
hold on.
No, but they're having parades where you can't wear the hat.
No. That's just my point. Like, I just think
what the hell is this about a hat?
You can't wear the hat.
What hat?
Because it's referencing biology.
There's some parades you can't wear the hat. You can't wear the pussy hat.
You can't wear the pussy hat because
you don't have one.
Because you don't have a vagina.
But you're a woman, even though you don't have a vagina.
But trans women don't have a vagina.
So you can't wear the hat.
That's right.
Okay, is there a rocket leaving for Mars? Because the hell with this place.
And that's my point.
I can't wait for Planet of the Apes.
There's so many aspects that they're upset about that they're just sort of overlapping, with what their outrage is about this time. So,
but it's crazy though, because you have women who are feminists who are arguing for the rights of women, and for some reason that should come second to this movement. Like, there's definitely a hierarchy among the left in terms of what you can and can't say.
I find myself, so I guess I'm not super conservative. I see myself generally as maybe slightly conservative. More and more on this issue, I find myself retweeting radical feminists who are the only people who are really unapologetically fighting back against the idea that, hey, maybe a rape crisis center shouldn't have a 6'2" person who 6 months ago called himself Derek.
And has a penis.
And it's only the radical feminists who are tweeting like, hey, that's not cool. And it's often mainstream feminists who are saying hooray because that's seen as a fashionable posture.
To your other point then, there are, within each of these almost subsets of groups, there's varying perspective, various strains of mindset when it comes to this sort of thing. So perhaps that group of feminists is going to, take over this mainstream one, which I frankly think that are just a bunch of, elitists.
A hat, right? It's a hat.
But before we move on, we should also acknowledge that as I think we covered on our podcast, there's probably a silent majority within the trans community itself who don't want to go work at rape crisis centers if they have penises and are like, guys or women are just like, be reasonable, be humane. You don't have to make your activism.
You know what? There's also how many people really face the issue of a trans woman in a woman's bathroom? I mean, the number of people who've had to face this as an issue is infinitesimal.
That's true.
And bothering to even talk about it, it's so anecdotal. Men don't care about who's in the bathroom because, as a rule, men don't look at each other in their bathroom. An elephant could be in there, we wouldn't know. But we're making giant issues out of things that should be handled individually because they happen so rarely. And the idea also that, you're talking about feminists who are biggest supporters of burqas. When I had my late night show, we had a hot tub and we had go-go dancers. And the point of the hot tub was to show these alpha males, these strutting alpha males would get in the hot tub and be owned within 4 seconds by the women in the tub. The women were strong. They had their own personalities. They could say whatever they wanted. They had names. They weren't objects. Same with the dancers. And when people say, you're exploiting women. These were the women they were wearing that same outfit to go dancing 2 days later for free. We were paying them and treating them like family. But because these women made these choices that the feminists say they shouldn't be making, somehow I was facilitating misogyny as opposed to facilitating these women making choice. We didn't force
empowering them.
You're giving them the choice.
Hot tubs are disgusting. You can get a staph infection.
I never let friends
super gross.
It was a petri dish.
No, honestly, I never go into hot tubs for that reason.
Our hot tub was sold for charity to somebody who lives in Kingston.
I
think it's actually the town attraction.
Kingston.
Right now in Kingston. I think it's
Say no more. Yeah, a disgusting city of sin. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Sodom. Kingston.
Sodom on the 401. That reference only makes sense if you live in Eastern Canada. We'll edit that out for our international listeners.
No, they can edit it out themselves. If you don't understand something, look it up. That's what Google's for.
So we are now going to move on from issues of gender and sexual orientation and that sort of thing to someone who has become an international sensation. I would say even in the months, Debra, since we did our podcast about Lindsay Shepherd, her name recognition has shot up. She's now going to conferences all over the United States. She's going to a conference in Australia. She has become this avatar of free speech and intellectual inquiry, and she's less than half my age. She's still in her early 20s. And for those who don't know the name Lindsay Shepherd, or maybe you didn't listen to our episode on the subject.
Google.
There's Google. Yeah,
Ed loves Google.
Just press pause and Google.
It's just Google.
Don't be doing my voice, John.
But I did kind of nail it, didn't I?
No, not at all.
Okay. So, no, all right, fine. This is why we have special effects people. So Lindsay Shepherd, she went to a small Canadian university in Ontario. It's called Laurier, and no one had heard of her. She was in fact a teaching assistant, not even a professor, and she showed her class, as a teaching assistant, she showed her class a video of Jordan Peterson, who I think people probably do know, controversial Canadian professor. He himself had been on a Canadian public television network discussing pronoun usage, and Lindsay Shepherd showed her class a clip from this TV show, something obviously that was not exactly particularly offensive in its own right because it was shown on a public Canadian TV station, a station called TVO. She was then reprimanded severely by one of her supervisors, a guy by the name of Nathan Rambucana. And Lindsay, when she was being reprimanded, not only by Nathan Rambucana, but by others in her department, and someone who had come in from, I think the equity office at the university, she recorded it. She then released the recording of that shaming session that she endured to the media. And it was that tape that made her a sensation, and which eventually, I think at the very peak of her fame, it was when she was on the Wrongspeak podcast, I think.
Right.
Yeah, that was pretty much the pinnacle.
And fell off a truck after that. It's like Buzz Aldrin going to the moon. What do you do next?
That said, I have seen Lindsay Shepherd at conferences, and no one knows who I am, but when she walks in, the piano stops playing. I mean, she's become an intellectual celebrity. She's also has a huge Twitter following. She's got herself into a few controversies, which we probably don't have time to get in here, but I think the reason the Lindsay Shepherd issue, I think we were so anxious to do it on our podcast, is because the medium of podcast allowed us to play segments of that taped conversation she had with her supervisors, in which she was, at one point, Jordan Peterson was compared obliquely to Adolf Hitler in terms of his viewpoint. And I think there were people, maybe from outside Canada, whose jaws dropped when they actually heard the terms in which she was being rebuked by one of her supervisors. Ed, had you heard the raw audio from Lindsay Shepherd's recording at Laurier before you heard the episode?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with Lindsay Shepherd, and I have to say that I have to look at Lindsay Shepherd as sort of a figurehead, not look at her as an individual, because there's lots of problems there. But what she did in recording it, I think, was a boon for exposing the kind of crap that goes on in academia. And again, the people in academia who panicked and said what they said to her were just they're afraid of the stampede that would happen against them, because of, you think of the universities in the States where you let somebody speak and next thing you know, the dean is resigning. So they're overreacting in preparation for the people who are going to overreact because of what was said by Peterson. So you've got this culture of people who are constantly looking over their shoulder. And I think these people at Laurier were ridiculous. But I understand where they're coming from. We're living in a time when you're going to get tarred and feathered if you don't do the right thing. And so while they tried to do a preemptive strike, they weren't necessarily out of step with what would have happened when the mob found them. So who do you blame in this situation? Yeah, you blame them for not having the balls to stand up and say, look, what was said here, it might be disagreeable to a lot of people, but it's within bounds. But they were just afraid. They were trying to keep their jobs like anybody else.
So just to explain to our listeners, so you're arguing that that Lindsay's supervisor and other officials at the university were scared that maybe a transgender advocate or someone else from within Lindsay Shepherd's class would complain, and they wanted to get ahead of the curve, and they wanted to make sure that they were protected in case someone did complain. They were protecting their ass.
Yeah, I'd like you to repeat everything I say as we go along, just in case.
So Ed has indicated that he was would like.
There we go.
He wanted to be proactive rather than reactive, which in fact is interesting in this situation. Which is what any good communications advice would give you: is like get in front of the problem before you actually have a giant hot mess on your hands. But it didn't quite work out that way for these.
The mess got pretty hot.
Wow. I mean, I'm going to answer this question in a few different ways. For starters, I think why Lindsay Shepherd has become sort of this galvanizing point in this broader conversation we're having about free speech, is because so many people feel they can't say what they want to anymore. They feel I'm not saying that people want to run around and call people the N-word and be racist and bigoted and seek Heil and all that stuff.
Well, you probably heard your share of that stuff when you were a kid.
Well, for sure. But I mean, I don't think it's that. I just think individuals just want to be a little freer to have, free-flowing conversations and not, worry about their language and, words are weapons. I understand that. So the reason why I think she's got to the point where she is because she was sort of this exact stereotype that someone like me on the political right, small c conservative right, would say is exactly wrong with the universities. She's this feminist and she
wears a beanie hat.
She wears a beanie. Yeah. I mean, I'm not judging on that, but
she's not married yet.
It's the sort of stereotype of, the patchouli smelling, hippity dippity, weed smoking.
We don't know that she smokes weed.
Yeah, no,
we don't know she smokes weed.
We don't know that she smells like patchouli either.
This is my construct.
She has actually said she's left the left as well since, but yeah.
So, but this is what I perceive as what a Lindsay Shepherd is all about. And so I find it fascinating that she could have been all these things, but she's, predominantly on the left side of the political spectrum, for example. And then all of a sudden, the ones that were literally killing her on social media are the left. I mean, she learned very, very quickly the mob mentality. What happens to you if you do not say the things that they want you to? If you do not think the things that they want you to? So I find her move to the other side, or not even to any side, just looking at this from both sides now, fascinating, because she's a perfect example of what the left, it's often the left, will do to you if you do not agree with them.
So if I could...
I just want to interrupt. They actually figuratively killed her on Twitter, not literally.
Yeah,
she's still alive.
Last time we checked, I would say that in general, an apostate is treated worse than a heretic. So if you were somebody who was in the university milieu, and then that's why Jordan Peterson, who actually has like fairly moderate views compared to your average, compared to like your average right-wing political pundit or
left-wing even.
But he gets it much worse than one of your columnists, because he's, oh my God, you're a hallowed priest of the university, and yet
you're not allowed to say those things.
Yeah. So that's an excellent point, because now she is given this platform and is afforded this opportunity to sort of give people who feel like they've been squelched and they're not allowed to say what maybe was on their mind. She is sort of this beacon of hope for them now. And it helps, I think, part of what Jordan Peterson has been talking about in academia, that they are, if you are, heaven forbid, you vote a certain way and you talk about it in the faculty lounge, you're going to be crushed, at the next, tenure track meeting. So there's all of this sort of happening, and it goes back to my earlier point that there's been so many people on the progressive left side that are so ticked off at everything. Eventually they're just going to start eating each other.
Well, eventually. They already are. If you're not left, the way you prove that you are more virtuous on the left is by attacking somebody who you think is less virtuous than you on the left. Not so much attacking on the right, because all the left agrees with the people on the right they don't like. It's you eat.
Well, it's also because there's such a bias in academia where everyone is a liberal, so you don't really have any conservatives to attack. So you can only really eat your own.
Well, there's not much. It's like cannibalism. There's no other animals, so we're going to eat ourselves. And I should say that Jordan Peterson, I think a lot of the stuff that he first got famous for is a lot of cuckoo crap. He's not going to jail.
Well, we can argue about that, because I think that's been misconstrued as well.
Let's argue about it another time. The fact is that comedians, let's just use comedians as an example, because you said people want to have conversations and not run around screaming the N-word. People want to be able to have reasonable conversations where, in fact, they may be told that they are wrong, and they may hear facts that prove to them, hey, maybe I got to rethink we can't have those conversations anymore where you have you trust the other person's a person of goodwill with a different opinion, and where you can say, hey, have you thought about this? We can't have those conversations really anymore. Comedians have stopped. The bread and butter of stand-up comedians was always the college circuit. They would make a lot of their money doing nooners at colleges. A lot of them stopped doing it because it is not worth the aggravation of going there and telling. It doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how middle of the road you are, you're going to say something because, when you carry a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Someone's going to find something offensive in your humor. Because humor, I think, is politics by other means. You're going to find something. And so it wasn't worth their aggravation. It wasn't worth the student union's aggravation to book these comedians. So they wind up not even bothering. I thought about jokes I was going to do and thought, you know what? Is this joke worth the aggravation I'm going to get for it? And no joke really is. Now, I don't feel like you always use discretion. When you're doing comedy, you always had to use discretion based on who your room is. And so sometimes I'm like, yeah, this would be funny. It's not worth the aggravation. Sometimes it is worth the aggravation. But you wind up checking yourself a lot more because it's not like I feel I don't have the right to say this. It's just, you know what? How much time do I have to look at Twitter today?
Hey, let me ask you a question, Ed. Is there something you've said in the last hour during this podcast that in the back of your mind you're like, oh crap, I'm going to get hell for that on Twitter?
You know what? I don't even remember what the hell we were talking about, so I couldn't tell you.
Well, I want to ask you then, how do you move the needle? Because if you have a situation like that where everyone says, you know what, it's really not worth me sticking my neck out and doing this. Because I see the same thing in academia where it's frustrating. I thought after the Lindsay Shepherd thing happened that there would be a turning point and that more people would feel empowered to speak out and to stand their ground. But I look within sexology and I'm seeing, the issues I have with the gender ideology and with the feminism and all the science denial is still there. And we see people are still talking about it quietly and they're too afraid to say anything. And I'm thinking, well, guys, when is it going to change? Because the field is just going to continue nosediving in this direction until it does go into the ground. So like the same thing with comedy, I think, with comedians who are understandably afraid, as my colleagues are. But how do you make a change then? Because those of us who are more outspoken, there are very few of us.
Well, let me tell you somebody who made a real change to comedy. It's a comedian named Lenny Bruce, who back in the 60s started talking about religion and race in ways that actually police were waiting for him at his events. As soon as he told a joke, they'd pull him off the stage for obscenity. He did change. He did break the paradigm of what was allowed to be discussed in comedy, which then what's allowed to be discussed in comedy then filters out into what can be discussed in the general public. They harassed him so much and put him in jail so much that he died of a heroin overdose. I don't want to be Lenny Bruce, and many people don't. Do you want to wind up being that martyr? But that's who that poor dead child who washed up on the shore, that poor refugee child, changed people's idea about welcoming refugees, about what they were going through. But you don't want to be that child or his parents. So there's always somebody who winds up being heavily victimized, who then everyone stops and says, okay, that was a little bit crazy. And that's usually the watershed moment. Now, I don't know if that's the case anymore with social media, because there's just so much crap all the time, yelling. I much preferred the world when I only thought most people were idiots. I don't need it confirmed now every day on Twitter. So how do you change the needle? Well, I think that you don't retreat completely. And you start, I think it's like the frog in the boiling water. You start at a regular temperature and slowly increase the heat. So you slowly start to push forward, slowly, incrementally. Because if you just go out there and say stuff, then you're going to be termed a shock jock or a shock comic. As opposed to somebody like nowadays, George Carlin would be considered a shock comic. Mm-hmm. And all he did was say things that made people question and think, which is what the best comedy does. That's why knock-knock jokes aren't really funny.
They're if they're good.
There's no such thing as there's no debate on this, doctor. There's no such thing as a good knock-knock joke. So there's no one answer. The key is don't retreat completely. Try to move forward.
Pick your battles.
You gotta pick your battles, and you hope that be part of the conversation, not doing comedy, that helps to try to keep conversation alive. Like I just did a fundraiser for my new network, the FU Network, FUnetwork.tv. And part of the goal there is the war on stupid. There's people really got behind, because right or left, we are dominated by stupidity. Now, people who just say things that are stupid, and then people lining up behind them to cheer them on because they don't even necessarily believe the stupidity the person said. They like that the person just came out there and said what they wanted to, even though it was stupid. You think a lot of people in the States really support the things Trump says? I think they just support that he just says stuff. And there's a lot of people who feel like for so long they've been held back from saying things that now they like the idea that, well, I can say pretty much anything now. I like that idea.
But so I confess that I'm part of this army of stupid.
You idiot.
I also have like a knock-knock joke that will kill. I'm going to tell that to you later. No, because so the people who support Trump, I kind of get it. So we're having this conversation in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. The newly elected premier of Ontario is a guy by the name of Doug Ford. Doug Ford has been compared to some people. They say, well, he's the Canadian version of Trump. I don't think he's the Canadian version of Trump. But that said, someone asked me a few months ago whether I would consider voting for Doug Ford. Mm-hmm. And I said something very Trumpian. Yeah. I said, he pisses off the right people.
Ah, well played.
And that way, I think.
And I said it without thinking. And no, but he's not Trump. But in that moment, I echoed the tribalism of a Trump voter, because what I was admitting was it's not necessarily his policies I'm voting for or not voting for. I'm not going to say who I voted for. I'm not on trial here. However, in that moment, that was the sort of thing a Trump voter would say, who would say, I want to piss off my enemies more than I want to elect somebody. Yeah.
And that's why I think that's the element of Doug Ford that is similar to Trump, in that his appeal amongst some people is who he pisses off.
Yeah. So I think to your point and to your actual question, Deborah, how do we move that needle? So if we were sort of looking in the world of academia, I think it's often departmental too, right? I mean, humanities tends to be, women's studies, gender studies, political studies,
race studies.
Tends to, all of these things.
But it's metastasizing into the technical sort of
It
view.
is, yeah.
But it's really those departments, those humanities types of departments that are so dominant on a campus, and they're the ones that go out and speak to the students' groups and whatever. It's always a humanities professor that's quoted on CBC or something like that. So they still have a far bigger voice. If you talk to a professor in business, in finance, in commerce, in engineering,
in science,
in some cases, in the science, they don't give a damn about this stuff. They're just like, let me teach my students.
Because they're busy actually doing their work. Yeah, exactly. They have better things to do.
But one of the things, and this is completely anecdotal, I've heard about this, and I think the United States has a far bigger problem on their campuses than we do with respect to freedom of speech and things like that. It's certainly creeping up here.
It's coming here, though, yeah.
But one of the things I've heard is that parents are pretty ticked off with a lot of this. They're child activists going and spending $30,000, $40,000 a year and not going to class. They're withdrawing funds. They're withholding funds. The alumni associations aren't getting enough money. So maybe that is one of the ways that you have to have leadership that will react to, because a lot of it's dollars and cents. In radio, you call it ratings and revenue. It's dollars and cents for a lot of academic institutions that are continuing to lose money anyway because you're moving to online and things like that. That's where I think you're going to get forced to change when you hit their pocketbook.
I'm really relieved to hear that because I didn't think parents actually knew what their kids were being taught at school. Like the sense I got is that parents just kind of send them off and their kids come back after a semester and they say, what is this?
Yeah, unless you're paying like $40,000 out of pocket every year for that kid to go to
Could we also admit that complaining about what your kids are learning in school is like as old as humanity itself? I mean, yeah. So just some perspective here. It's, this isn't new.
Do you think this is overwrought then? Do you think it's not really that big of a deal?
As I've said on Twitter, I'm sending my kids to study metallurgical engineering in China, where, it's rote memorization, a lot. And,
then they're going to come back Asian and they're not going to be allowed into Ivy League schools.
I don't want them to come back. I want them to send remittances back to North America to keep me in the lifestyle to which I've become accustomed. I have a whole plan. You know what? This is for our financial planning podcast.
They'll come back and live next to me in Markham.
That is, you know what? That's problematic. It's true, but it's problematic. Markham, for those who aren't in the Toronto area, is a wonderful suburb of Toronto, full of people of color who sold me my Audi a couple of years ago.
Well, that's fancy.
Yeah. It was a used car.
Cars.
Yeah.
John, I think people kind of got the context anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
Wikipedia, John.
Google. Hey, knock.
Who's there?
Interrupting cow.
No, not moo. Not moo. It is not funny. It is still not funny.
It's kind of funny. It's kind of funny.
It'll actually never get old.
Knock.
It's pretty good.
Knock.
Who's there?
It's a mime.
That's funny.
That's not funny.
No, it's not
that's funny. It is funny.
No, okay, now we've seen your level, John, of what's funny.
You know what? I'm like Banyan from
like
Seinfeld.
clowns.
No, I like stuff you don't have to think about too much. That's funny.
That's not funny, and you did have to think about that when everyone here was like scrunching up their face like, I don't get it.
You could actually hear the gears in my brain actually turning until it generated
that was.
spat
I
out.
smelled smoke.
Yeah.
Are we done here?
I think we're done. I think with that, we're done. Yeah.
Why don't you guys tell our listeners where they can find you?
Adrienne?
They can find a number of my columns on torontosun.com. They can follow me on Twitter at Adrienne Batra. They can check out my super fun Instagram, also Adrienne Batra. And that is all the various platforms by which I engage.
I'm on Twitter at EdTheSock, and you can find the rest of my stuff at funetwork.tv, which is my new online network, bringing back the spirit of much music, but which is kind of what you guys are doing. People talking, being authentic, speaking as people speak. You'll find a lot of content there that's not just me. But that's where you can find me, fighting my war on stupid.
With no hot tub, right?
There's no hot tub. I told you it's in Kingston.
And thanks again to our supporters at Quillette and to the world-class Montreal-based boutique law firm of Goldwater Dubé, whose lawyers can help you if you've been accused of your own act of wrongspeak or anything else. Look them up at follow.gd/wrongspeak, where, by mentioning this podcast, you'll get 25% off their usual hourly consultation rate. Once again, that's follow.gd/wrongspeak, or contact them through their website, goldwaterdube.com. That's goldwaterdube.com. Go.
Don't be doing my voice, John.
But I did kind of nail it, didn't I?
No, not at all.
Okay.